Guys, this is me Ashik. So in this video we're going to create our own URL shortener app. We're going to do it from scratch. So before we begin, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and let's get started. So the first thing is that you need to install a couple of dependencies. So you can install them by just running a pip env install and the package name, which will install them in your local machine, or else you can just download this pipfile.log and you can just do a pip env sync, which will install them in your local machine. So after installing the dependencies, so we need to create our application. So we're going to do imports. We say from Flask import Flask, and we'll also be using a couple of other things as well. We'll be using request, render template, and redirect. Yep. So let's create an application. App equals Flask underscore underscore name underscore underscore, and let's create an 1 second. Let me just close this. So let's first create an index route. We say at app.route. So in this route we are going to define a function called index, and we are going to return a template, render template, which is going to be index.html. So we'll create the index.html here. So let's create index.html. So in this HTML we are going to be creating a form by means of which users can input their actual URL and they can choose a short name for their URL. So let's give it a title of URL shortener app, and inside of this body we'll create a form, and the action is going to be the default URL. So slash, it's going to be index, and the method it's going to be post, and inside this form we are going to create a couple of input fields. So we'll use emit input. Oops, sorry for that. We will create a label, and this will say enter short name, and we'll also create an input field, input, the type will be text, and the name for this input field is name, and the placeholder it's going to be maximum of 20 characters, and we'll also give this a max length. We'll give max length of equals 20. We'll also create another input field, label. Here we say enter the URL, and we'll create an input field of type text, and we'll give this a name of URL. The reason we give the name is that by using this name we can get the value of this input field in the backend, so that's why it's good to give it a meaningful name. Placeholder maximum, so we'll just say enter the URL, and this is also going to have a maximum length of 200. So we also need a button, so we'll create a button which says submit. So let's first see whether this works. Let me set the environment as development so that the debugger is on. So we'll do Flask run. The app is starting up. Yeah. So if you go into this URL, yeah, we get to see our form, but it's not really nice. So we are going to style it up. So let me just include a style sheet here, and we are going to use Ginger syntax to link this style sheet. We say URL for static, comma, file name is equal to /css /index.css. index.css. Yeah. Yeah. So let's create the style sheet inside this CSS folder, index.css. So let's first do a couple of styling. Form, it's going to have a width of 600 pixels and it will have a padding of 1 rem. It's going to have a border of 1 pixel solid DDD, and then it's going to have a margin of 10% comma auto, and then we'll style the label as well. You want the label to display as a block. We will give this a margin bottom so that the input fields go down. We'll give it a 1 rem, and let's style the input field. The width is going to be 100% and the border is going to be 0.8 pixel, so we'll give 1 pixel solid DDD, and border dash radius is going to be 8 pixels. Then we'll also style the button. It should have a width of 100%. Background color is going to be Dodger blue, and then the color of the text, it's going to be white, and it should have a margin top of 1 rem and a padding of 1 rem. Border dash radius, we'll also give this a border radius of 8 pixels, and we'll also give a padding to the input field as well. We'll give 1 rem. So I guess that's enough for the styling. If I refresh this now, so yeah, we'll just add a header tag here. We'll say h2 create your short link. We will just have an hr. So now if I refresh this again, so here we see create your short link. Yeah, that's, and we'll also give the label a margin top. We will give this a margin dash top of 1 rem. We will also give the, we'll also choose the font. We'll say asterisk. The font family is going to be Helvetica, and that's it, I guess. Yeah, that's it for the styling. Now we are going to get this form data in the backend. So since this is going to accept the post method as well, we say methods equals get and post. So now if the request dot method, if it was a post method, so we get the data from the backend. So we say short name equals request dot form dot get, and the name of the input field, which is name, so we'll just pass it, and the URL is equal to request dot form dot get. It's going to have a name of URL. Yeah, so now we need to make sure that the users typed in the URL with the protocol. If not, we'll just add it up. We say if HTTP, if it is not in URL, so we just do a URL equals an f string of HTTP colon slash slash URL. The reason why we are doing is that we can access an HTTPS site through HTTP. So this is not going to do any problem as well, problem or not. So and then we need to make sure that the URL is a valid URL. So we do that by creating a function. We say if valid URL, we'll pass in the URL, and if this was a valid URL, so let's first pass this up. Let's create in the function in utils.py. So we are going to use a library called validators to validate the URL. They import validators, and we'll create a function called valid URL, which is going to take an URL as a parameter, and we say return validators dot URL of URL is true. So what this does is that if the validators.url is a valid URL, this will return true, and then the comparison will be made and we'll get the return value as true. If not, this the return value will be false. So, and then if the URL was a valid URL, we need to make sure that the short name which the user chose is actually available. So what we will do is that if the URL is valid, so we just create a function called if name available yeah, sorry for the typos, and we'll pass in the short name. And since we need to query the database, let's first see what we have in the database. We are in the database called URL Shortner, and we have a single table called URL info, inside of which URL info, inside of which we have three columns: ID, name, and age. So let's connect to this database. So to connect, we need to do a couple of imports from SQL Alchemy. We are importing create engine, and from SQL Alchemy.orm we are importing scoped session and session maker. So and now we need to create a database engine and a database object through which we can connect to the database. So I'm just going to copy this up, copy and paste it. So yeah, if you are not sure on how to connect to a database, do check out our previous video where we cover on how to connect to a database from Python. What we are doing is that first we are creating a database engine, and then we are creating a database object with a separate session for each user. So now let's create a function called if name available, which is going to take in a name, and what we have to do is that we just return db.execute. We use this to execute an SQL query which says select star from URL info where short underscore name equals colon name. So this is the SQL Alchemy syntax of passing in a variable than using an f string. So the advantage of using this method is that if SQL Alchemy escapes the quotes and all those special characters, we have to do is that, so we need to pass in a dictionary as the other parameter. So we'll say it should have a key of name, and the value is going to be colon name. So what this does is that this is going to replace the value of this key name in this place. So we just say dot fetch one, which fetches us the first result. So if the name available, if this function returns none, which means that the short name which the user chose is available in the database. So what we will do is that we will add the URL to the database, should pass in short name and URL. So let's add the URL to the database as well. We'll create a function called add URL. It's going to take a name comma URL, and we say db.execute, and we say insert into URL info the columns name and URL with the values of, we are again going to use the same syntax, colon name comma colon URL, and we'll pass in a dictionary of name colon name comma URL colon URL. So since we are changing the value in the database, we need to do a commit. We say db.commit, and since we have added the URL to the database, we need to notify the user that their short link is actually created. So what we have to do, so we say return, we are going to return a string, so where we say we'll create an h2 tag of style equals color colon green. So just to highlight this as a successful message, so we say your short link was successfully created. So we close this h2, and then we will create an h4 where we say your short link is, so then this has to be an f string. Your short link is, since we are doing this locally, the short link is going to contain the local host. So we say http // and the domain in which our app is running 127.0.0.1 :5000 / the short name which the user chose. So if you want to know how to deploy this to the internet, let me know in the comments. So if we get enough comments, we'll also do another video on that. So let's close this h4 tag. So and that's it. If the URL was valid, we are adding it to the database. If not, we need to notify the user that the URL was that the short name was not available. So we say index.html, we are going to pass in a message which says invalid URL. So what we have to do, and again, if the short name is not available, we should also say the user that we'll say return render template index.html, and we are going to pass in the message as short name not available. So let's print in the message in the form. Let's create a paragraph tag, and before doing that, let's first check whether the message is available. So we say if message, we will close this if, we say end if there is a message, we are going to print it up. We say message, and we will also style this style equals color colon red. So yeah, so if the URL is available, we are adding it to the database. If the URL is not available, we are returning an error message. If the short name is not available, we are also returning an error message. So the next thing is actually going to be our actual application. So if the user accesses our site using the short link, we need to redirect the user to the actual URL. So let's create another route. We say a tab dot route, it's going to be slash, and we are going to use an URL converter. We'll use the path converter colon path name, and let's create a function called redirect URL, and which is going to take in this path name as a parameter. We will create a function. So then creating a function, first we need to make sure that the path name is a valid path name. So let's use in the same function which we used to check for the available, whether the name was available or not. So let's again call this function if name available. So if this function returns none, which means that, so we need to change this to path name. If this function returns none, which means that the short name which the user typed in the search bar is actually not present in the database. So we need to return a message. We'll will return an h2 tag of style equals color colon red. We will close this and we say invalid URL. So let's close this h2. Yeah, and if the short name is valid, we need to redirect the user to the actual URL. So we'll create a function called URL equals get URL. We're going to pass in the path name. So let's first create a function which gets the URL from the database. So we'll create a function called get URL, which is going to take short name as a parameter. So what we do is that we just say return db.execute. So I think rather than, since we have this name, since we have this function which already returns the record when the short name matches the short name, we can just reuse this function to get the data. I guess. So let's use the same function. So let's just place it inside of this URL equals name available, sorry for the typo, should be a path name. And instead of saying this, we say if the URL is none, which means that the URL is not valid. So else if there was an actual URL, we are going to redirect the user to the actual URL. So we say return redirect URL. So I guess we are pretty much done with all of these. Let's first check this again. We are getting the data from the backend and the functions are right. We will also save this. Return validators.url tb.execute select start from insert into. So I guess this should work right now. Return validators.url tb. So our app is still running, so let's refresh this first. Oh, if name available, where did I get a syntax error? Line 15. Where am I getting the syntax error? If name available, I guess we are making some mistake. Where am I making a mistake here? Name available. So I have to, since we are doing everything from the utils.py file, I have to import it everything. So I just forgot, what a dumb mistake. So we say from utils we import everything. So let me refresh this. Again, unexpected indentation. Yep, sorry for that. So let me indent this. Let me refresh this again. So name database URL is not defined. I defined it in the utils.py database URL. Data, oh shit, it's another typo. So let me refresh this. Yeah, now our app is running. So I'm going to create a short link for my LinkedIn account. So let me copy my LinkedIn URL. And the short name is going to be ashik-linkedin. And the URL, this is the actual URL. Oops, I did not copy it properly. So LinkedIn, yep. Let me copy this. Let me copy all of this. So let's hope that this works. We are going to submit this. Now we get an error. Oh, sorry, the column name was wrong. The column name was short name, but I just gave it as name. So we'll refresh this again. Yes, we'll continue. This view function did not return a valid response. Where was that? Response equals. So let me see it down here. Return an f string. Return redirect. Index.html. We are. If this was a post method, we are getting the data. If not, we are accessing it. Where am I making a mistake? Refresh this. No, short name is not available since we refresh the page twice. So let me create a short link for my GitHub account. So I'm just going to say ashik-github, and this is going to be https://github.com/ my username ashik11ab. So let me submit this. Oh, it isn't returning any response. Why is that? Why is that? Let me refresh this again. So let's first see whether we have the URLs, but we are missing something down here. This is an f string. Yep. So let me indent this. Returning an h2 tag. Yep, this should work. So since let's create an, let me just go into geeks for geeks. Let me just choose some random site. We'll choose geeks for geeks. Some random site. We'll choose geeks for geeks. So let me just copy their URL. It is going to be, so let me create a short link for that, gfg, and let me paste this. Let's try to submit this. This function is not returning a valid response. Why is that? Let me, rather than this, let me return an success.html. We'll say return render template success.html. We will just add this up in the HTML. So let's see whether this works or not. Let me cut this up. So let's create a success.html. So success.html is going to be success. We will paste in the HTML here. Yeah. We are passing in the short name. We will pass it here. We say short name equals short name. I guess this should work. So let me refresh this again. Nope, let me just refresh this, cancel. Let's choose another site, refresh this again. Let's choose lead code. So let's create a short link for that. We'll choose LC for lead code. We will paste in the lead code. Let's try to submit this. Yeah, so now we see that our short link was successfully created. I guess there was some problem with the rendering a string, so I have to see what is that. Oops, the ginger syntax was not proper. I guess it should have been double curly braces. Yeah. But now if I refresh this again, this name is already saved into our database, so I'll get an error. So let me try to access this. So if I type in /lc, it should redirect me to the lead code side. So let's see whether this works or not. Let me press enter. Oh, name available, again a typo. So sorry for a lot of typos. Should be somewhere here. Available. Yeah. So I'll try to refresh this. Invalid URL. Oh my gosh. So why is this an invalid URL? /lc invalid URL. Why is that? So let me lc which returns, what is this function name available? This should return the result. Why isn't it returning? So just a second guys, I'll just debug this up. Yeah, so guys, the error was that this URL, which is a variable which it's actually a tuple, so we need to say url dot url to access this actual URL. So that was the error. So let's try to do this from first. We'll just create a short link called py, so which is going to act as a short link for the actual Python website. Let me try to submit this. Yeah, so this is going to be my short link. I'll copy this up. I'll open another tab. So I'm going to paste this. Let's hope that this works. Yep. Yeah, so our short link is actually working. If I again try to go into /ashik-github, this should work. Yeah, this is redirecting to my actual GitHub. This is my GitHub. So that's it guys. This was I think it was a pretty long video. So if you guys enjoyed this, leave a like below. So if you wanted to know how to deploy this to the internet, let me know in the comments. We'll also do that in our later videos. So that's it guys. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.